we were really interested in kind of an unflinching look and a fresh look at what a victim of violence would look like, both for my character, the agent, the good guy, and the bad guy, the serial killer.
I don't like the sound you're making. But I love your smile.
I did a lot of research on female serial killers, which was like really terrifying and interesting. And but a common theme, not surprisingly, is that they are victims of violence, and then they become perpetrators of violence. And interestingly enough, they're also often caretakers, which I thought was like really interesting. And that led me to, oh, this is a story about the cycles of violence, and this is a story about how women. It's so common to be a woman with a history of being a victim, and I feel like the full story of that is rarely told. I think a lot of the times you see women in TV and movies as victims where that's like the only thing that they are. They're a victim and you feel sorry for them.
Oh, they were so beautiful and tragic, and she lit up every room she walked into.
Right. And
it flattens us ultimately.
Yes. And so I got excited about the possibility of just complicating all of that and showing, how violence, the experience of violence can get in your bones and come out in very strange, self-sabotaging ways, and it can also come out, in violent ways to other people, and just really digging into all of that.
Part of what I thought was so fascinating about this show is that it is talking about these really tough topics, like sexual assault, like sex trafficking, but it's not giving any opportunity to exploit by showing us those things in their reality. But it's still very impactful the way things are shown. So I was wondering from your perspective, because you're not just an actress in this, you're also a producer. Can you talk a little bit about that perspective and how you guys managed to decide what was going to be on camera and what wasn't?
Liz was emphatic from the drop that she wasn't interested in flashbacks, and that she was much more interested in the effects of the violence on both of our female characters and how it influences how they behave now. For Alice, she's become very disconnected from herself. She doesn't believe she can get justice for herself, and so she's really obsessed with getting justice for others, even at the expense of even taking care of herself, unable to shower. We know that she smells, which I think is so brave for anybody to put in anything, because people smelling bad in our culture is really a sense of shame and something that we see exists for Alice. And also the effects of the violence on her and the effects of doing this job in law enforcement on her disconnection from herself and her softness, how she has become such a machine in this job that she invites these strangers into her house to fight, which is something that when you read it the first time, knowing that we like victims of violence to fit in a certain box, I was scared of doing that scene. I didn't understand it. I really had to look at the parts of myself and work with a psychologist to understand the parts of myself that were resistant to it, the parts of myself that overlapped with the character and what to cannibalize in mine, and how to understand the separation between myself and the character, the ways in which we were different, to remember those. And also to understand that for this character, love and sexuality and violence and control have existed within the same relationship. And so I think we were really interested in kind of an unflinching look and a fresh look at what a victim of violence would look like, both for my character, the agent, the good guy, and the bad guy, the serial killer, who I think on this collision course we'll realize are more kind of similar, and there's like an invisible thread of sisterhood that kind of ties them together.
So I'm curious for you, because it's such an interesting character, but like, how much of it did you know who she was going into shooting the first episode? Because so much of her is revealed throughout the series.
I think we had a pretty good idea early on. Even when I received the first two scripts when I read, and I think very early on you get an idea of who she is, and then as I signed on, Liz obviously revealed more. So we definitely knew the heart and the crux of Catherine before we started shooting, and her motivation. So pretty early on, that was all really apparent.
So for you, because she is playing all these roles within her life, how was it for you to kind of figure out who you are in each given moment and how much of herself she's revealing in those moments?
So I think that is sort of Catherine's superpower. And I think it's, for anyone who is, a woman or socialized as a woman as a kid, you learn very early on to read emotional temperatures of rooms. It's a socialized thing because you have to, whether that's for safety or to have a grasp of the room or so that you're not underestimated or you are underestimated based on what's happening. And I think for these people, for Catherine and Alice particularly, it's a trauma response. And so I think everything that she does is led by that, and it's what she's really good at. And unfortunately, it comes from something that's quite dark and horrible, but she's able to harness it and use it to achieve her means.
There's been a lot of things lately about the things that are too dark on the internet for us to talk about, and how different films and TV shows deal with that by what they choose to show. I thought it's really impressive that in Furious, we're not showing even the glimpses of incarnations of this stuff, but instead they introduce Mira, and you have your character talking to her and being like, I was your age. Can you tell me a little bit about shooting those scenes and what you think those moments were like for Catherine?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think that's really impressive about the show. I think that, sometimes on screen it feels like we're showing these violent images of things that happen to women in their bodies, and quite often there either isn't a reason or we could have done it without it, and often it's the better artistic choice. And I think having Mira there, and the young actress that played Mira was just so phenomenal. I mean, it was so much better than any flashback ever could have been, to be confronted with the image of her. And so those were difficult, challenging scenes, but also intensely rewarding scenes. And when you get to work with an actress like that, especially a young one, who is so emotionally open and able to pull things out of you that you didn't even expect, it's a complete and utter gift.
Well, speaking to that, because I will say I was watching this with my partner, and when Mira shows up, we both went, oh no.
Right.
And it's interesting to see where Catherine draws the line on who she will sacrifice and who she will spare and all that kind of stuff. Or that might sound the same thing. Who she'll kill and who she'll spare. Why do you think she leaves Mira alive?
But Mira is an innocent, a complete innocent. Mira hasn't done anything wrong. I think anytime that she kills someone, I think I think Catherine has her own moral standards that while other people may not understand them, they're there. And Mira is a complete innocent, and therefore has no reason and she sees herself in her. And when they have that moment, you can see it all over Mira's face, and I think that Mira believes her.
Yeah.
Even
when she tells it back and she's like, we were doing our hair like twins.
Yeah.
It's also, as I said, a very good way to reflect that this is what she looked like at that age. We don't need to do a flashback. You get it.
Yes.
I love that. Speaking to that, Becky, why do you think Becky gets killed? I'm not going to go through every kill, but
this one.
No. It was just those were two that I was like, oh, this is interesting. Which way are we going to go with this?
Well, because, even though we know Catherine is who Catherine is, Becky doesn't know that when she works at the shelter and she takes advantage of a vulnerable person. And so for Catherine, you gotta go. You're just as, I think, Becky in a sense there is just as bad as any man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the thing of I'm no, I get you're attracted to her, but the dynamics of this are such a nightmare.
100%.
Oh God. Yeah, it was really fun to watch this and be deeply stressed out. I started rewatching it and I was like, oh, this is easier because I know how things are gonna go, and I'm not up here the whole time. So good for rewatching. Part of what I thought was so interesting about this show is it basically uses kind of the sexy elements of the original movie Black Widow to talk about women and friendships and also sex trafficking and sex work. So it's I hesitate to say Trojan horse because I feel like everyone's talking about the Odyssey right now, but it is a good metaphor. And it is a show where you use a lot of Greek mythology, so I feel bear with me on that. But can you talk a little bit about putting this together and dealing with these really difficult topics in a way that isn't alienating.
A friend of mine told me to watch Black Widow. I did. It's such an interesting movie. You know, it feels like it's really in that world of like 1970s, 1980s movies where there isn't that push to kind of explain everything that the character is doing in a great way. But they really don't go into. In fact, there's like a Deborah Winger scene where she almost makes fun of like giving a monologue explaining who she is. And then there's this like incredibly weird section of the movie where, after watching this cat and mouse female serial killer and female FBI agent dance around each other the whole movie, they just start hanging out at the beach together. And it's like really strange, but also I found really moving because I see these two women as almost just so desperate for connection with each other. And in some ways, like, they are the only ones that can really see the real person underneath in a way. And I wanted to take that and, you know, put it into this show. And I think if you're adapting a movie for a TV show, there needs to be, you know, if something that you need to, like, why do that? Like, you have to bring something to the project. So I think I knew I needed to kind of dive into the psychological parts and like try to figure out why these two women became the women that they are. Mm-hmm. And that led me sort of inevitably to an idea of being a victim of violence.
What I was so impressed by, because I've watched a lot of, especially I will say movies lately, where the topic is people who've seen something so terrible online that they're experiencing trauma from it. And then the question within the film is like, how do you get that across to an audience without showing them? And some of them do, and some of them show glimpses, or some of them don't show anything. And what I think is so fascinating about Furious is you guys are talking about terrible things, but you never feel the need to show the things we're talking about. And I think it still comes across.
Because I'm not really like, I'm not interested in the thing, because I think that is, you know, that's where you get into kind of like sensationalism a little bit, I think. And I think I'm interested in what it does to you and the long-term effects of the violence that's been, you know, perpetrated on you. And I think that was important to me, to kind of keep the focus on these two women now in the present moment and kind of not go back and show everything, you know, that had happened to them.